Hello everyone, good afternoon, welcome to At the Races, our second edition of Ask the Handicapper. If you're going to ask the handicapper, what you need is the best in the business, and we bring you the best in the business on the Ask the Handicapper show. He is, of course, the chief of handicapping at the British Horse Racing Authority, and we thank BHA for letting Phil come on, because as we said in our first show, Phil, back in the day, trying to get someone like you to speak publicly would have been like, you know, trying to move a mountain.
It was a bit tricky maybe 15, 20 years ago, but we have a policy of openness and happy to answer any of the questions that your viewers put in.
And that's key, isn't it? Because what we'd like is anyone out there who's got, you know, sensible questions about handicapping. Why is a particular horse handicapped as it is? Why are, you know, Golden Horn got his current rating? Why is Shalar such a good 2-year-old? All that kind of stuff. And an example was this morning, actually, very early doors when we flagged this up. Hugh was on 3 hours ago, getting in quickly. And we touched on this in our first conversation, but of course not everyone watches every show. And I think it's worth going back to. He's talking about the unifying of handicapping between the United Kingdom and Ireland. And he talks very much in specifics here about the Perth meeting on July the 2nd and 3rd. Gordon Elliott had 13 runners. 12 of them were in the first two. Lucinda Russell, who does well at the track, had 7 runners. She didn't have anything in the first two. Now, of course, it could just be that the Gordon Elliott horses were good and the Lucinda Russell horses weren't good. But is Hugh right to be worried that Irish horses could be well handicapped?
OK, I have to go back a fair bit to try and put the whole thing in context. Many, many years ago, 15 years ago, Irish horses came in and they ran off their Irish rating, and their success rate was unacceptably high compared to British horses. And we decided the best thing to do was to keep our own ratings, which we've been doing since around 2003. And just looking back, and I think that you know, looking at statistics, you've got to look sort of have a reasonable sized statistical sample. And so going back to 2011-12. The Irish success rate in all UK handicaps the whole season was 9%. In 12-13 it was 8.3%. In 13-14 it was 9.3%. And that would be a little bit lower than the normal British success rate, but only by about 1%. Normally, the typical success rate over a whole year in UK handicaps is around 10%, and they're jumping. So that was OK.
Yeah. But back in the day, there was that period at Cheltenham, weren't there, where some Irish horses were coming over and winning handicaps on the bridle, like as if they'd just been chucked in.
Absolutely. That tends not to happen nowadays because we keep our own ratings. And they tend to be higher than the Irish ratings in 99.9% of the cases, because, and the main reason for that is we have a different weight for age scale, so they start off with a higher rating when they're 4-year-olds and they go from there. Now, I think Hugh has a point, because the success rate are starting with season 2014-15 and carrying into the current season is 14%. And we've discussed it at handicappers meetings, and clearly we've got to look again at our Irish ratings. It's probably slightly more the hurdlers than the chasers, but the chasers need to be looked at as well. But at the moment, we appear to have, and we're constantly changing our methodology and looking at things like this on a regular basis, and we seem to be having a situation over a period of time, and I don't take that Perth as a good example because you're looking at too small a statistical sample, but I do agree with you that over a period of time, the success rate of 14%, for me, is too high, and we will be looking to change that over the next few months.
It's a fascinating topic. I just want to expand it a little bit, Phil, because it is actually something you could do a whole show on. Because Chris has just emailed in with the expansion of the topic in some ways. Chris Robinson, he says, Northern jumpers seem very badly handicapped with Irish jumpers when the Irish race here. This needs addressing. And we've noticed that Nigel Twiston-Davies, who effectively is a southern-based trainer, I think we can say, has gone up to Perth and mopped up. And isn't there an issue that Gordon Elliott, in particular, it seems at this stage, has almost seen a niche here, that the northern jump scene is a weak division? I don't think anyone up north can say it's not. It is weak compared to the south. And isn't there an argument that a horse rated, let's say, 120, trained in the north, running at northern tracks most of the time, if that horse came down to Sandown or Newbury and took on a Paul Nicholls horse rated 120 or a Nicky Henderson horse rated 120, that the chances are that northern horse might then be found to be exposed?
Totally disagree. So I agree with your first question. I totally disagree with that premise. Again, we've kept figures on British, Irish and Northern success-trained horses in handicaps at both the Cheltenham and Aintree festivals. So they would be the real barometer of, you know, when those horses... So they would be sending horses down 120 plus, 125, 130. And going back 8 seasons, actually, Northern trained horses have a higher success rate than the whole of Britain. So that's absolute nonsense. So I don't accept at all the fact that Northern trained horses are badly handicapped as a group. They're fairly handicapped as a group compared with the Southern trained British horses. But I do agree with Hugh's original point that recently, in the last 6 months or so, that Irish horses have, in my view, slightly too high a success rate in our handicaps, and we will be addressing that.
Could those figures be masked by the fact that it's only the rare occasion when a Northern horse is good enough to come down south that you actually get to see it, and therefore it does compete, whereas a lot of the Northern trainers might actually feel that their horses are badly handicapped off those marks, so they just don't send them down south?
I think the key thing is that there's no question that we look at this from horses rated above 140, which is that you might basically say is a good horse. Anything above 140 is a good horse. And looking back in the Anglo-Irish jumps classification, going back to when that started in 1919-2000, there are far fewer Northern trained horses in the classification now compared with 10, 15 years ago. Well, that's just a question of the decline in the level of the ability of the horse, but it shouldn't have any effect on the handicap system, because if we've got less horses rated 140, the whole cohort of Northern trained horses will come down.
So you honestly believe, because you statistically will say you're correct,
Absolutely.
that there's no Northern South bias in jumps racing?
Absolutely none. Not at all. But don't accept that at all.
I think that will come as a surprise to our viewers, as we found out last time about horses that win bumpers are more likely to win another bumper than less likely, statistically. Yeah. I think that will come as a surprise. Let's do one other tweet, just for chat, and then we'll get into a topic to get people talking. Mr. Levy, or Mr. Levi, depending on how you say his name, has tweeted. He says, it's hard to judge marks. And basically he's talking about closing jockeys, although he specifically mentions Jamie Spencer and George Baker. But when they ride in their kind of style, pigeonholed style, because of course Spencer made all on Big Orange the other day, and Baker is very good from the front as well. But basically, closing jockeys, when a horse comes late and fast and wins by half a length, does that make it very hard for you to assess that horse?
Well, it is more difficult, obviously, and you'd look again and again and again, and the key thing is to decide how much that horse, you know, has in hand. You know, because half a length can be an absolutely all-out half a length, and half a length can be with the jockey looking around over his shoulder for non-existent dangers. So it's how the race actually pans out that we would be concerned with. But they are slightly more difficult than front runners who because you've got much more of an idea of the definitive, correct winning distance. So they're a little bit more difficult, but not, you know, that doesn't make them more difficult to handicap. We should there's no reason why my team can't come up with figures for those horses.
Excellent stuff as ever from the chief, Phil Smith. More of him in a moment. Studio at theraces.com or on Twitter at @theraces. We're just going to bang out a quick break. After the break, is Golden Horn a better horse than American Pharaoh, the Triple Crown winner? Phil will be hopefully answering that question after this.